The ocean was restless that morning, not violent, just uneasy, as if it knew something the villagers didn't. Seagulls cried louder than usual. The skies, still cloaked in pre-dawn mist, bore a strange stillness, but for Noah Carter, this was just another day to survive. He stood barefoot on the damp wooden planks of the dock, his calloused fingers tightening the frayed rope that held his fishing boat together. The Marigold had seen better days, so had he. At 28, Noah wore the fatigue of someone 10 years older, salt from the sea, lived permanently in his scruffy beard and sunburned skin. His faded flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up, flapped in the wind as he adjusted a broken motor that coughed more than it roared. To most, he looked like a man chasing something lost long ago, but to those who really knew him, if any still did, he was a man trying to keep his soul intact while life chipped at it, piece by piece. His mother's medicine had run out 3 days ago. The pharmacy refused more without payment, and the fridge back home hummed with nothing but cold air and a half-empty jar of pickles. Still, he didn't complain. He couldn't afford to, not to the world, not to himself. He glanced at the horizon. Clouds rolled low and thick. A storm was whispering its way in, but he had no choice. "Just bring me enough to get through the week," he whispered into the sea as he pushed off the dock. The words weren't a prayer. Noah hadn't prayed in years. The sea wrapped around him like a familiar sadness. With every wave that rocked the boat, memories returned. His father, once a proud fisherman, lost to a squall like the one approaching. The house that used to echo with laughter now only creaked in the wind. The dreams he once had, swallowed by the tide. As he adjusted the net, something shimmered on the far edge of the fog, something strange. He squinted. A sleek white yacht, motionless, almost broken. Wrong. What the hell was a luxury yacht doing this close to the shallow reefs? He steered closer, wary, heart racing. As he neared, realization struck like thunder. The boat was sinking. One side already tilted dangerously, water gushing in from a shattered hull. The name Sea Mirage, painted in elegant silver letters, was barely visible through the chaos. "No one comes out this far, unless they're lost," he muttered, heart pounding. That's when he saw her. A flash of white movement, then stillness. A girl, alone, slumped on the deck, long dark hair tangled across her face, her arm outstretched, her dress soaked in blood and seawater. Noah didn't think. He couldn't. Instinct took over. He yanked the boat alongside the sinking vessel, tied what little rope he had, and leapt aboard. The surface was slick. He almost fell. Water now waist-deep surged over the lower deck. He rushed to her, lifted her gently. Her skin was cold as stone, but she was breathing, barely. One eye fluttered open for a second, hazel, terrified, then darkness again. She couldn't have been more than 22. As the yacht groaned and tilted, he carried her in his arms, fighting the pull of the sea and time. One wrong step, and they'd both vanish. He made it back to the Marigold seconds before the yacht slipped beneath the waves with a final, angry roar. Breathing heavy, soaked and shivering, he wrapped her in his own jacket. His pulse thundered in his ears as he touched her forehead. She murmured something, too soft to hear. Who was she? Where did she come from? And why the hell was someone like her alone, on a sinking yacht in the middle of nowhere? Noah didn't know yet, but something deep inside told him. This girl wasn't just a stranger. She was going to change his life forever. The sea had turned violent. What began as a whispering breeze earlier had now grown into angry gusts that howled through the sails like wolves in the dark. Rain sliced sideways, sharp as broken glass, and the waves thrashed at Noah's tiny boat like fists, trying to drag them under. Noah gritted his teeth, both hands gripping the wheel, as the marigold lurched and groaned beneath him. One arm was still wrapped protectively around the unconscious girl, whose fragile body lay covered in blankets and soaked layers. Her head rested against his chest, her breath shallow but steady, each exhale a quiet victory against the sea. Every time the boat slammed into another wave, his heart skipped, fearing she'd be thrown, but she remained still, tucked into him like something precious, someone he didn't even know, yet felt he couldn't afford to lose. He didn't even know her name, but somehow, that didn't matter right now. "Stay with me," he whispered against her damp hair, voice shaking from cold and fear. "You didn't survive that yacht just to die in my arms. Not tonight, not now." Her fingers twitched slightly. He held her closer. The storm was merciless. Waves as tall as houses loomed and crashed, flooding the deck, but Noah's focus never wavered. It was as if fate had thrown a test at him. Protect a stranger with nothing but a dying boat and stubborn will. He didn't even think about turning back, not when there was no lighthouse in sight, not when the world blurred in gray and salt. Only one thing was clear now, her. Hours passed like years. By the time the storm calmed, the sun had begun to rise, a faint orange smudge beyond heavy clouds. The village coast appeared like a ghost from the fog, silent and still. Noah dragged the boat onto the beach himself, muscles screaming, knees buckling. Then, with a strength born only from desperation, he lifted the girl into his arms again and stumbled toward his tiny shack at the edge of the dunes. His cabin wasn't much, just 2 rooms, patched up windows, and the smell of seawater soaked into the wood. But it was warm, it was safe. He laid her gently on the cot beneath his only blanket, started a fire with trembling fingers, and boiled water for tea he couldn't afford to share. As the flames flickered, casting amber light across her face, he studied her features for the first time. She was beautiful, but not in the magazine cover kind of way, more like something carved delicately from emotion. Sharp cheekbones, lips slightly parted, a long cut down her collarbone from the yacht's wreckage. Her eyes fluttered again, but didn't open. He wanted to speak to her, ask her name, ask why she was out there, why someone like her had been lost in a world that didn't belong to people like him. Instead, he said softly, "You're safe now, I promise." He wasn't sure if she could hear him, but something about having her there in his arms, someone who needed him, who wasn't using him, judging him, or asking him to be more than what he was, made him feel more alive than he had in years. That night, as she lay sleeping beside the fire, and the sea continued to groan outside the window, Noah sat silently in the corner of the room, watching her chest rise and fall. He didn't know it yet, but that moment, that storm, that rescue, that spark of connection, was the beginning of something that would shake both of their worlds. She wasn't just a lost girl from a yacht, she was the storm he didn't see coming, and perhaps he was the anchor she didn't know she needed. The first sound she made was a broken whisper, a whimper, barely audible, escaped her lips as the wind rattled the windows of the fisherman's cabin. Noah jerked upright from the floor, where he had been dozing, heart leaping to his throat. She stirred under the blanket, her body twitching, as if fighting off shadows only she could see. Then slowly, her eyes opened, hazel-wide, glassy, and filled with confusion. She blinked, looking around like someone pulled from a dream, and dropped into a foreign world. "Where am I?" she croaked. Noah stood carefully, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. "You're safe," he said softly. "My name's Noah. You were on a yacht. It sank. I found you, pulled you out before it went under." Her brows knit together. She touched the side of her head, where a bandage now rested. "My name," she paused, swallowing hard. Sierra Langford." The name meant nothing to him, but the way she said it, like she was unsure whether she wanted him to know it, told him everything. Sierra tried to sit up, groaning as pain radiated through her side. Noah was beside her instantly, placing a gentle hand behind her back to steady her. Easy, you've got a nasty gash on your ribs, and a slight fever from being in the cold so long. She looked at him then, really looked. His tired eyes, the cuts on his knuckles, the damp clothes clinging to his skin. A man who looked like he hadn't slept in days, and had still saved her life. Why would you risk yourself for me? She asked, her voice shaking. You didn't even know me. Noah gave a tired smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. You looked like someone who didn't deserve to die alone. The silence between them was heavy, unspoken emotions swirling in the quiet hum of the fire. Noah stood to pour her a cup of weak tea, handing it to her with both hands, careful not to brush against her skin too much. But when their fingers did touch, it lingered. Just for a second, she stared at the chipped ceramic mug. You live here, alone? He nodded. With my boat, and my mother. She's sick, mostly sleeps now. Sierra looked around. The cabin was small but held warmth, a quiet kind of peace that felt foreign to her. There were hand-carved wooden trinkets on it, photos of a boy and an older woman on a fishing dock. Photos of a boy and an older woman on a fishing dock. A life of simplicity and struggle. She whispered, "It's peaceful." Noah let out a dry chuckle. First time anyone's ever said that. That night, she couldn't sleep. Neither could he. Sierra lay by the fire, staring at the dancing flames. Noah sat across the room, pretending to read but failing. His eyes drifted to her too often. She was different, not just rich-looking, not just beautiful, but haunted, somehow, as if she'd been running before the yacht ever began to sink. He wanted to ask her what she was running from, but more than that, he wanted her to feel safe staying just a little longer. At some point, Sierra turned her head toward him, voice barely above a whisper. "Noah, thank you for saving me." He looked up. Their eyes met across the orange glow, and in that look, something passed between them, a kind of unspoken understanding. Two people from different worlds, stranded in the same storm, and in that moment, neither money nor poverty mattered, only this, a quiet room, a crackling fire, two broken souls, beginning to heal, in the presence of each other. Morning came gently, golden light filtered through the cracks in the wooden shutters, casting soft patterns across the room. Outside, the ocean had finally calmed, its once angry roar now a distant whisper. But inside Noah's cabin, something had shifted, something tender, something unspoken. Sierra stirred beneath the blanket, the warmth of the fire replaced by a different kind of warmth, one that came not from flame, but from safety, from presence, from the slow return of memory. She blinked against the light, her eyes adjusting. The pain in her ribs was still there, but dull. Her head pounded less, her lips were dry. And then she saw him, Noah, asleep in a wooden chair near the door, arms crossed, head tilted back. The sunlight kissed his stubbled jaw, and for a moment, he looked almost peaceful, vulnerable, even. She studied him, the lines etched into his forehead, the roughness of his hands, the quiet strength in the way he carried himself even in rest. He had stayed up all night for her. A stranger. Her throat tightened. The wooden floor creaked softly. As she sat up, Noah stirred, then blinked awake, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. When he saw her awake and upright, something lit up in his face. Relief, subtle and quiet, but real. "You're up," he said, voice rough from sleep. She nodded. "I feel better, thanks to you." He shrugged. "You did the hard part. You stayed alive." Sierra smiled faintly, but her eyes betrayed something deeper, a sadness she tried to hide, the kind only those who've learned to suffer silently carry with them. She glanced around the room. "It's quiet here, peaceful. I haven't felt that in a long time." Noah tilted his head. "Where are you from?" There was a pause. "Too long." Her expression shifted. "Far," she answered vaguely.
somewhere that doesn't feel like home anymore. He noticed the deflection, but didn't press. He knew what it was like to avoid questions that hurt too much to answer. Later that morning, he offered to make her something to eat, though there wasn't much. A little bread, some fish he dried and salted. He apologized for how plain it was, but Sierra took it gratefully, savoring every bite like it was the first real food she'd had in days. "I've had 5-course meals," she said, chewing slowly, "but none of them felt this real." Noah smiled at that. Fish is honest, doesn't pretend to be something it's not. "Wish people were like that," she whispered, not looking up. That hit somewhere deep in him. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that felt full, rather than empty. As the day wore on, Sierra tried to move around. Noah helped her to her feet, his hands steady beneath her arms. She winced from the pain, but something about his touch grounded her. He wasn't afraid of her. He didn't look at her like a trophy, or a burden. He looked at her like she mattered, and for someone who'd spent her entire life being looked at, but never seen, it was a feeling she couldn't explain. They walked slowly outside. The air was crisp. The sea stretched endlessly before them, glittering under the morning sun. Sierra closed her eyes and breathed it in. "This is beautiful," she said. Noah looked at her instead. "Yeah, it is." That evening, she sat by the window, watching the waves roll in, wrapped in one of his old flannel shirts. It was oversized, smelled faintly of salt and smoke, and somehow felt like armor. Noah handed her a steaming mug of tea, and sat beside her, not too close, not too far. She turned to him, eyes soft. "You saved my life, and you didn't even ask who I was, or what I had, or what I could offer." "I didn't need to," he said quietly. "I saw someone drowning. That was enough." Sierra looked down, her fingers tightening around the mug. "You're different," he shrugged. "Maybe, or maybe I've just lost enough to know how much it matters when you get the chance to hold on." Their eyes met again, longer this time, slower, and in that moment, something passed between them. Not love, not yet, but something real, something beginning. Because sometimes, healing doesn't begin with answers, it begins with presence. And two broken souls, quietly drawn to each other, in the stillness of survival, might just become each other's reason to hope again. That night, the waves whispered outside, like old memories returning to shore. Sierra sat cross-legged on the floor, near the fire, a blanket draped over her shoulders. Noah was across from her, mending a torn fishing net, with quiet focus. The steady rhythm of his hands, and the crackling of the fire, filled the silence between them. But her mind wasn't here, not really. It was back on that yacht, back to the night she fled. "I wasn't supposed to be on that boat," Sierra said suddenly, her voice so soft Noah almost missed it. He looked up, eyes curious, but patient. He didn't prod, he waited. She stared into the flames, her face lit in flickers of gold and orange. "I took it without telling anyone. I just needed to escape." Noah set the net down slowly. "Escape from what?" She hesitated, then exhaled, long and heavy. "My life," she said, "my name, all of it." There it was, the first wall breaking down. Sierra pulled the blanket tighter around her. "My father is Richard Langford. You've probably seen him on magazines, or in some headline about mergers and billion-dollar acquisitions." Noah blinked. No, he hadn't made the connection. Langford, that Langford. "Guess I should have known," he said after a beat. "You're not exactly from around here." Sierra gave a dry smile. "You think?" They both chuckled, but hers faded quickly. Her gaze dropped. "I wasn't running from money, Noah. I was running from emptiness." She paused, her voice trembling now, more vulnerable than ever. "My mom died when I was 9. After that, Dad just poured himself into his empire. He gave me everything, except love, except time." Her fingers clutched the edge of the blanket. "I grew up in rooms bigger than this entire cabin, but never felt safe in any of them. My birthdays were press releases, my smiles were scheduled. I was always someone else's version of me. Noah's jaw clenched. He had nothing, yet she made him realize that even the richest hearts can starve. She looked up, eyes glassy. When I told him I didn't want to marry the man he picked for me, he laughed, like I was a child, like I couldn't possibly know what love is. She paused, voice breaking. So I ran, took the yacht, thinking I'd get a day, maybe two of peace, and then, the storm. Noah finished gently. She nodded. And you? A silence settled. Not heavy, not awkward, just full, like the space between notes in a song. Sierra looked at him, really looked. This man who had less than anyone she knew, yet had given her more peace, more safety, more truth than all the luxury she'd ever drowned in. Noah, she said, do you know what it feels like to be looked at like a possession your whole life? He shook his head. She leaned forward slightly, voice cracking. Then you don't know what it means to be seen like this, like you see me, as just a person, a soul. He swallowed, then quietly said, I see you, Sierra. Their eyes locked, long, deep, unblinking. The fire snapped in the hearth, as if igniting something that had lived just beneath the surface between them. She reached across the space, her fingers brushing his. Not a kiss, not yet, just a touch, an anchor. For the first time in years, Sierra felt like she could breathe, and for the first time in a lifetime, Noah felt like he mattered to someone, not for his strength, not for his hands, but for his heart, and neither of them knew what tomorrow would bring. But in that quiet storm of confession and closeness, one truth had already taken root.
Sometimes the greatest rescue isn't from drowning waters, it's from the life you were never meant to live. The days that followed moved slower than time itself, and that was the magic of it. For the first time in her life, Sierra wasn't expected to be anything. Not perfect, not poised, not Langford's daughter. In Noah's little world, on that wind-worn stretch of coast, she was simply Sierra, a girl with messy hair, barefoot in the sand, learning how to gut a fish with trembling fingers, and laughing when she failed. Each morning began with silence, not the empty kind, but the sacred kind. Sierra would wake just as the sky began to blush, wrapped in the warmth of Noah's old flannel shirt, her bare feet touching the cool wooden floor. She'd tiptoe outside, finding him already by the shoreline, casting nets with practiced ease, framed by a sky turning from ink to gold. And he'd always look over his shoulder and smile, not the kind of smile that asked for anything, but the kind that gave something instead. Couldn't sleep, he'd ask. Didn't want to miss the sky, she'd whisper. Neither of them said it aloud, but they both knew these mornings had started to mean something. Breakfast was always simple: fish, toasted bread, if the fire was right, and weak coffee that tasted like burnt hope. But Sierra would sit across from him, at the tiny table, legs tucked under her, smiling as he told stories about the sea. You really named your boat Marigold, she'd tease one morning, a mischievous sparkle in her eyes. It was my mother's favorite flower, Noah said, not embarrassed, just honest. Sierra stopped laughing. I didn't mean to make fun. You didn't, he replied softly. She named it herself. There was a pause. Sierra reached across the table and gently touched his wrist. It wasn't just comfort, it was recognition of loss, of love, of shared pain, unspoken. Later, she helped him patch the side of the boat, sitting side by side, their knees brushing now and then. It was nothing, and yet everything. At one point, she paused, staring out at the sea. Do you ever feel like the ocean listens more than people do? Noah looked at her. Every day, they sat in silence, their breaths sinking like a tide between them. One afternoon, as rain began to patter on the roof, Sierra asked if he'd teach her how to make the fish stew he always cooked. Secret family recipe. She smiled. He raised an eyebrow, more like accidental genius. They moved around the small kitchen like it was a dance. Neither of them had rehearsed, but knew instinctively. Sierra chopped. Noah stirred. Their fingers brushed on the spoon. And this time neither pulled away. "You're not bad at this," he teased. "I burn toast," she admitted. "Then you're officially promoted to sous chef." She grinned, eyes shining with something unspoken. That night, as they ate by the fire, Sierra leaned her head gently against his shoulder. No words, just warmth, just heartbeat. And Noah, who hadn't held anyone close since the night his father was lost to the sea, closed his eyes and let her stay. It wasn't about romance, not yet. It was about safety, stillness, trust. But something was shifting in the spaces between shared meals and quiet mornings, between laughter and silence, between looks that lingered and touches that stayed. Two hearts that didn't believe in love anymore had started to believe in each other. Some loves don't start with fireworks. They begin in quiet moments, in a shared glance that lasts too long, in a breath held when someone walks into the room, in the feeling that even silence is better when they're in it. That's how it began for Noah and Sierra. It had been a week since the storm, a week since Sierra had fallen into Noah's world like a wave crashing onto shore, uninvited, unexpected, unforgettable. The bruises on her body were healing, but something deeper had begun to bloom inside her, a feeling she couldn't explain. She felt safe with him, seen, heard. And for Noah, the girl from the sea had become more than just a guest in his home. She was becoming a part of it. That morning, the two of them had gone for a walk along the shoreline. The sky was wrapped in soft gray clouds, and the wind was light, the kind that made hair dance and hearts beat faster. Sierra walked barefoot beside Noah, her jeans rolled up, laughing as the cold waves kissed her ankles. She held her arms out like wings and twirled in the surf, her joy infectious. Noah watched her, a soft smile playing on his lips. He didn't say it, but something inside him whispered, "You belong here. You belong with me." Later they returned to the cabin, cheeks flushed from the wind and laughter still lingering between them. The rain started again, soft at first, then stronger, tapping against the windows like a melody. Sierra stood by the glass, watching the droplets race. She turned to him, a sudden light in her eyes. "Dance with me." Noah blinked. "What?" She walked over, took his hand. "Dance with me, Noah. No music, just us." He hesitated, but only for a moment. Then he took her hand, pulled her gently toward him, and they began to sway. There was no rhythm, no steps, just bodies finding each other. Her head found his chest, her arms slowly wrapped around his back. His hand settled at the small of her back, fingertips brushing skin where her shirt had lifted slightly. The world outside faded, just the soft sound of rain, the beating of hearts, the breath between them. Sierra looked up, their eyes met. This time, they didn't look away. Her fingers touched the side of his face, tracing his jaw like she was memorizing him. "Noah," she whispered, "what are we doing?" He didn't have an answer, only a truth. "I don't know," he said softly, "but I don't want it to stop." Their faces moved closer, not in haste, not in confusion, in gravity, in that electric pull that only happens when two people realize they've wandered too close to something real. Their lips met, not with fire, but with tenderness. A first kiss that didn't demand, but promised. Not passion, but possibility. When they pulled away, their foreheads touched, and for the first time since she'd run away from the life built in gold and loneliness, Sierra felt something she hadn't known she was starving for: home. That night, they lay beside the fire, not tangled in lust, but wrapped in trust, their fingers laced, breaths synchronized. "I wasn't supposed to find someone like you," she murmured. Noah looked at her, eyes soft,
And I wasn't supposed to believe love was still real. She smiled, eyes heavy with sleep. Then maybe we're both exactly where we're supposed to be. And as the rain fell outside, they fell too, slowly, beautifully, into each other. Some truths come like gentle rain, others crash like thunder. For Noah and Sierra, it was the latter. It had been one of those golden afternoons. Noah had taken Sierra out on the Marigold, her first time on the water since the wreck. She was nervous at first, tense, pale, gripping the edge of the boat, as if the past would reach up from the water and drag her down again. But Noah had held her hand, steady and warm. "You're not out there alone anymore," he'd said, and with him beside her, she believed it. They'd spent hours drifting along the coast, trading stories, laughter, and soft glances that lingered longer than they should have. Sierra even tried to help with the nets, and ended up tangled in one, both of them laughing so hard she collapsed into his arms, cheeks flushed, breathless. He kissed her on the forehead, and she closed her eyes, heart full. It was the kind of peace that felt too perfect to last, because it was. Back at the cabin, Noah was rummaging through a drawer, searching for an old map to show her the deeper parts of the sea. That's when he found it, her phone. It had dried out after days near the fire, buried beneath his spare clothes, forgotten, lifeless, until now. Curious, Noah tapped aside. It buzzed, the screen flickered, then came to life. A single notification flashed across the screen. Sierra Langford missing, billionaire's daughter, presumed dead after yacht disaster. Noah stared, frozen. Photo after photo loaded. Sierra, red carpet, gala events. Her father, Richard Langford, one of the wealthiest men in the country. Headlines swirled. Inheritance, legacy, search parties. The world was looking for her, and she hadn't said a word. Sierra stepped into the room seconds later, humming softly, cheeks still pink from the sun. She saw the phone in his hand, and her heart dropped. "Noah," she whispered, voice brittle. He turned slowly, eyes unreadable. "You lied to me," he said. She shook her head. "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you." He let out a cold, hollow laugh. "Right, you just happen to forget that the world thinks you're dead, that you're the daughter of a man who could buy this entire coast." Her face crumpled. "I didn't want that to be who I was with you. I wanted you to see me. Not the name, not the legacy, just me. You should have trusted me enough to tell me," he said, softer now, but the hurt was deeper. "I was scared," she confessed, tears in her voice. "Every time someone knows my name, they change. They want something. You were different. You were real. I didn't want to lose that." Noah looked away, and that hurt more than anything. The silence between them was no longer full. It was fractured. She stepped forward, reaching for his hand. "Noah, please, say something." He looked at her, eyes stormy. "I meant every word I said to you, but now, I don't know if any of yours were real." And with that he walked past her, out the door, into the cold wind. Sierra collapsed onto the floor, her heart pounding. The phone buzzed again. 30 missed calls, hundreds of messages. The world wanted her back, but the only person she wanted had just walked away. That night, the cabin felt empty, even though she remained inside. Noah's absence echoed in every creak of the wood, in the untouched dinner, in the cold side of the bed. She had found love in a place where she never expected it, and now, she feared she had lost it, the same way, not because of who she was, but because she hadn't trusted him with the truth. The wind howled all night, but not louder than the silence inside the cabin. Sierra sat curled by the fire, knees to her chest, staring into the flickering embers, like they could burn away the ache in her chest. Every creak of the wooden floor, every shift of wind outside, made her turn toward the door, hoping it would be Noah. But he didn't come back, and the world she had left behind finally caught up. It began with the distant sound of a chopper, low, steady, getting closer. She stepped outside, shielding her eyes from the morning sun, and saw it, a black helicopter, with tinted windows descending over the village. Then came the black SUVs, kicking up sand and gravel as they rolled into the sleepy coastal town, like invaders from another universe. Suits, sunglasses, armed security, Langford Security Division. Within minutes, villagers crowded around, murmuring in awe and confusion. Children pointed. Fisherman stood with crossed arms and narrowed eyes. Sierra stood at the edge of the dunes, her heart sinking. She didn't have to guess who sent them. Her father had found her. Noah Carter, one of the men, asked a boy near the dock. He pointed up toward the hills. They were looking for him too, but Sierra's focus was on the man stepping out of the third SUV. His salt and pepper hair, slicked back, navy trench coat flowing like it belonged on a runway, not a beach. Richard Langford, her father. He saw her and froze. Then with a flick of his fingers, the cameras were pushed back, and the crowd hushed. Sierra, he breathed, his voice layered with relief, exhaustion, and something colder, control. She didn't move. He took a step forward. Thank God, you're alive. She wanted to run, to scream, to disappear again, but all she could do was whisper, I didn't want to be found. His jaw tightened. You could have died. I almost did. But someone saved me. Someone you'll never understand. Sierra, his voice softened, pretending to be fatherly, but she saw the panic beneath it. Not for her life, for his name. My whole life, you tried to control who I should be, she snapped, tears stinging her eyes. You picked my friends, my clothes, even the man I was supposed to marry, but you couldn't control this. You're coming home, he said, his voice hard now. This isn't a negotiation. Sierra turned her back to him. I was already home, she whispered. But Noah, he wasn't here to hear it. They found Noah by the cliffs, near his favorite fishing spot. His hands were clenched, his eyes unreadable, as he watched the chaos unfolding below. You going down there? The village boy beside him asked. Noah didn't answer. He could see Sierra surrounded by men in suits, her figure small, lost again in that world of marble floors and gold cages. He turned away. Sierra didn't resist. As they led her to the SUV, she didn't fight, didn't scream, but before the door closed, she looked up at the hills
and hoped he was watching, because even if the world had found her, the one heart that truly knew her was slipping away. As the convoy drove off, a seagull cried above. The boat rocked gently in the tide. The cabin stood still, empty, cold, and for both of them, the storm hadn't ended. It had just begun. Again, inside, the village was quiet again. The dust had settled. The luxury SUVs were gone, and so was she. Noah stood at the edge of the sea, the marigold rocking gently beside him, half tied and half forgotten. His fishing nets lay untouched. His hands hung at his sides, raw and cracked from work he hadn't done in days. But it wasn't the salt air or the cold wind that made his eyes sting. It was the emptiness. Sierra was gone, and it felt like someone had reached into his chest and torn out the only piece of him that had remembered how to hope. He went through the motions the next morning, casting his net, pulling it back, empty, fixing a broken rope, feeding his mother, but everything felt hollow. The colors of the sky were dull. Now, the sea, once his refuge, felt more like a reminder. Every place, every creak of the cabin floor, every cup on the shelf, every echo of laughter in the quiet was haunted by her absence. Her smile, her soft footsteps, the way she'd press her forehead to his when she was scared, the way she made his little world feel big again. At night, the fire still burned, but only because he couldn't bear the cold. He would sit there, staring into the flames like she used to, imagining she might walk back through the door imagining her arms wrapped around him again, her voice whispering, "I wasn't supposed to find someone like you." But the door never opened, and silence was her answer. The villagers noticed. They saw how Noah had changed, how he spoke less, smiled never, and stared at the horizon, like it owed him something it had stolen. Mrs. Tally, the baker's wife, dropped off soup one evening, and found him sitting in the dark. "You all right, Noah?" He didn't even lift his head. "She wasn't like the others," he murmured. "She saw me." Mrs. Tally laid a gentle hand on his shoulder, but she said nothing, because what could anyone say to a man who'd tasted a glimpse of love and lost it to a world that didn't speak his language? A few days later, Noah stood on the dock, holding the small scarf Sierra had left behind. It still carried her scent, salt and rosemary, wind and warmth. He clutched it to his chest, like it was the last thread holding his soul together, and for the first time in years, he cried. Not the kind of tears that spill quickly and fade, but the kind that shake a man's body from the inside, the kind that only fall when someone leaves who was never supposed to come in the first place, and yet changed everything just by being there. He whispered into the wind, "Why did you come if you were just going to leave?" But there was no answer, only the tide, rising and falling, like a heartbeat trying to remember how to keep going. Noah didn't know where she was, didn't know if she'd come back, didn't even know if she thought of him anymore. But he did know this. He had given her his heart, but now, everything felt like drowning again. The marble floors were spotless, the chandeliers sparkled like frozen stars, the silk sheets on her bed were imported from Italy. Then still, Sierra Langford had never felt poorer. It had been a week since she left the coast, a week since she was dragged back into the world of luxury, a world that looked beautiful, but felt like a prison. She was back in her childhood bedroom, untouched since the last time she'd cried herself to sleep in it, at 16. The books were still arranged by color, the paintings still hung exactly where the designers had placed them. It was all immaculate, soulless, silent. There was no scent of sea salt in the air, no creaking floorboards, no firewood crackling, and no Noah. Her father had thrown a press conference the day after she returned, flashing cameras, reporters shouting questions, a well-rehearsed speech about how family comes first, and we are grateful beyond words. Sierra had stood next to him, smiling for the cameras, while her heart broke behind her ribs. The only thing she wanted was one man, and he was the only one who hadn't been invited. She didn't sleep that night, or the next. She tried to talk to her father, tried to explain what she had found, who she had become, the love she had stumbled into like a miracle from the ocean. But Richard Langford didn't believe in miracles, only in control. "You went through a trauma," he said coldly. "You're not thinking clearly." "I fell in love," Sierra whispered, tears rising. "With a fisherman," he scoffed. "What future do you see with someone who can barely feed himself?" Then that was the moment she realized he would never understand. Not Noah, not her, not love. She began shutting everyone out. Her phone went unanswered. She skipped meetings, dodged family friends, and stopped pretending to care about charity galas and business dinners. Instead, she sat by the window every evening, looking out at nothing. In her hand always was the scarf Noah had wrapped around her when she'd shivered by the fire. It smelled faintly of smoke and sea, and home. One night, Sierra walked barefoot through the Langford estate garden. The moon was full, and the wind was cool. She stopped near the fountain, the same one where her mother used to read to her as a child. She sank to the stone edge, wrapped her arms around herself, and whispered, "I left my heart behind." She remembered Noah's hands, rough but tender, his voice, low and steady, always telling her the truth, even when it hurt. His silence, full of meaning. His eyes, always searching hers for permission to hope. And she realized,
What they had wasn't an escape. It was the first time she had ever truly been found. She couldn't take it anymore. The mansion, the legacy, the name, none of it mattered, because what was the point of a gilded life if you had to live it without the one person who made you feel alive? That night, Sierra made a decision. She would leave again, but this time not to escape, this time to return. It was just before sunrise, when the black town car pulled up on the edge of the sleepy fishing village. The driver, confused, asked again, "Miss Langford, are you sure you want to be dropped here?" Sierra didn't answer. She simply stepped out, heels in her hand, toes sinking into the cool sand, her heart beating wildly beneath a loose white cardigan that fluttered in the wind. She looked around. The village was still asleep, but she knew exactly where to go. Every step toward Noah's cabin felt like walking through memories. There was the dock where he first tied up the marigold, the hill where they had watched the sunset in silence, the trail where their hands first brushed and stayed together a little longer than they should have. And there, standing weathered but solid against the sea breeze, was the small wooden cabin that had once felt like the safest place in the world. Sierra took a deep breath and walked to the door. She knocked. No response. She knocked again, softer. Noah. Still nothing. She stepped back, heart sinking. Maybe he wasn't home. Maybe she was too late. But then, the door creaked open, and there he was. Noah stood in the doorway, eyes shadowed, beard slightly thicker, hair messier, but still the same eyes, the same man, the same heart she never stopped missing. For a moment, neither spoke. They just stared, and the world held its breath. Then Noah said, voice low and guarded, "You came back." Sierra nodded, tears already threatening. "I had to." "You didn't have to do anything," he said, stepping back. "You already made your choice." She winced at that. "Noah, I didn't choose them. I chose survival. I chose not to be dragged out again, like some headline. But I never stopped choosing you." His jaw tightened. "Then why didn't you come sooner?" "Because I was scared," she whispered, voice cracking. "Not of losing them, of losing you." Noah turned away, pacing slightly. "You disappeared, just like that, like it meant nothing." "It meant everything," she cried, stepping inside now, her voice rising with emotion. "You saved my life, Noah, not just from the ocean, from everything, from who I was becoming, from who I never wanted to be. And I let them pull me away, because I thought I didn't deserve what I found here, with you." She was crying now, breath shaking. "But I do. I want to deserve you." He stood still for a long time. Then he turned to her slowly, eyes red. "I couldn't sleep without hearing your laugh in my head," he said, voice shaking. "I tried to move on, tried to hate you, but I couldn't, because I loved you. I still do." She stepped closer, barely breathing. "Then say it. Say you still want me." He looked at her like a man drowning all over again. Then he pulled her into him. Hard, desperate, honest. Their lips met in a kiss that was less about passion and more about pain. A kiss that said, "You broke me, and you built me back up." Then they finally pulled away, forehead to forehead. He whispered, "Don't leave again." She nodded, tears streaming, smiling through them. Never. That night, they sat by the fire again, this time, not as strangers, not as survivors, but as two people who had walked through storms, apart only to realize that home wasn't a place, it was a person. The days that followed weren't perfect, but they were real. Noah and Sierra spent them side by side, not in fantasy, but in truth. Their conversation stretched deep into the night, peeling back every fear, every regret, every scar left behind by the storm between them. They weren't just falling in love again, they were choosing each other now, intentionally, eyes wide open. One evening, sitting on the porch with their feet dangling off the edge, watching the horizon melt into orange and violet, Sierra turned to Noah. "I can't live in that world again," she said quietly. "That mansion, those people, that silence. I can't shrink myself to fit that cage." Noah looked at her. "And you think you'll be happy living here, with a fisherman, a tiny cabin, no security guards, no drivers?" "I don't want security," she whispered. "I want peace. I want truth. I want a life where love feels bigger than fear. He smiled faintly, but his eyes still held doubt. But I can't give you the life you grew up with. She turned to him and took his hand in hers. Noah, you already gave me more than that life ever did. You gave me a reason to stay when all I wanted was to run. You gave me mornings that felt like poetry and nights that felt like home. You gave me you. Still, Noah wrestled with the weight of her choice. He didn't want her to give up everything, her name, her future, her possibilities, just to be with him. And that's when Sierra surprised him. She walked into town the next day, with her father's lawyer on the phone, her voice steady as steel. I'm not walking away from my name, she said. I'm redefining what it means. But within days, the world learned that Sierra Langford, daughter of one of the wealthiest men in the country, had donated a large portion of her inheritance to fund a coastal sustainability program, one that would support small fishing communities, like Noah's, provide education for children, and restore damaged ecosystems. It was called the Marigold Project, in honor of the boat and the man who saved her. She didn't reject her past, she just rewrote her future. With Noah, together, they bought a slightly bigger boat, one that worked, one they named the Second Sunrise. He kept fishing. She started a small community initiative by the shore, teaching children, writing grants, and smiling more than she ever had. And the cabin, they rebuilt it together, board by board, nail by nail, keeping the soul, but adding more light, more warmth, more space for the life they were growing together. One night, after a long day of work and wind, they stood outside the cabin, watching the stars. Sierra leaned into him, her fingers tracing the lines of his palm. Noah, she whispered. Yeah, ask me again. He looked at her. Ask you what? Ask me if I still want this, if I still choose it. He turned to her, placing his forehead against hers, voice low and raw. Do you? She smiled, tears glinting in her eyes. I never stopped. Because real love isn't about sacrifice. It's about building something beautiful from two very different lives, together, and choosing each other, every single day. The wind danced softly through the tall beach grass. The sea whispered like a lullaby, and the morning sun rose slow, casting golden threads across the water as though painting a memory that refused to fade. Everything was still. Everything was exactly as it should be. A little girl's laughter rang through the open space of the new cabin porch. She was barefoot, chasing seashells with a woven basket, curls bouncing in the breeze. Inside the cabin, Sierra stood at the counter, pouring coffee into 2 old mugs, one chipped, the other hand painted with a marigold. Behind her, Noah wrapped his arms around her waist and kissed her cheek. How does it feel? He whispered. To wake up every day with the life you once thought you could never have. Sierra leaned into his chest, smiling softly, like coming up for air, and realizing, I was never meant to drown in the first place. 5 years had passed since the night of the storm. 5 years since 2 strangers from different worlds collided in the dark, and chose to write their own light. The cabin had grown, not in extravagance, but in warmth. There were books on the shelves now, photos on the wall, handmade drawings taped to the fridge, and tiny footprints in the sand outside. Their daughter, Mira, had her mother's eyes, and her father's soul. She knew the sea before she could walk. She called the waves whispers, and the wind a hug from the sky. Sierra spent her days running the Marigold Foundation, now expanded to villages across the coastline, supporting education, environment, and empowering women like herself to choose freedom over expectation. And Noah, he still fished, still rose before dawn, but now, he never sailed alone. Sometimes, it was Mira, giggling as she learned to steer the boat. Sometimes Sierra, reading beside him, with her feet in his lap. And sometimes, it was just him, and the sea, quietly remembering how far he'd come. People from nearby towns still whispered about them. The rich girl who gave it all up. The poor fisherman who never asked for anything. The kind of love that didn't make headlines, but made history. On their anniversary, Noah took Sierra back to the same stretch of beach, where she'd first walked barefoot toward him, after returning from her father's estate. The sky was the same shade of lavender and gold, but this time, there was no pain, just promise. He knelt on one knee, not to propose, for that had long passed, but to hand her a shell. Inside was a silver ring, engraved with the words, "You saved me too." Her eyes filled, and she whispered, "Every storm I survived was just leading me back to you." They kissed, and the tide rolled in, gentle and steady, and the world faded around them, because sometimes love isn't loud. It doesn't scream across rooftops or blaze through skies. Sometimes it's anchored, quiet, deep, and unshakable. The kind of love that no storm can ever take away. The girl from the yacht, the fisherman with a broken boat, the storm that brought them together, and the life they built against all odds. A love story, born from wreckage, and reborn in every sunrise.